The Untouchable Mind, Part 1. The Stranger on the Train. It was a rainy evening in New York City when I met the man who changed how I looked at pain. The train was crowded, filled with tired faces, each carrying their burdens home. Across from me sat a man in a gray suit, calm, still, and strangely radiant despite the chaos around us. At the next stop, another passenger bumped into him, spilling hot coffee across his jacket. The crowd gasped, waiting for the usual explosion, anger, cursing, maybe even a fight. But the man in the gray suit only smiled, patted the stranger on the shoulder, and said, "No harm done." Then, as if nothing had happened, he opened his book and continued reading. I was stunned. Anyone else would have turned red with rage. Anyone else would have made the coffee accident the story of their evening. But this man, he seemed untouchable. I had to ask, "Sir?" I leaned forward. "How can you be so calm?" "That was hot coffee. Your suit is ruined." He looked at me with eyes that carried no trace of irritation. "Young man," he said, "life will always spill coffee on you. Some days it's insults, some days betrayals, some days rejection. But here's the secret. Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. If you let every little thing get inside your mind, you'll never know peace." Those words lodged in me like a seed, waiting to grow. That evening, I began to see the world differently. The hidden mastery. Most people, perhaps 95 out of every 100, live as prisoners of their emotions. One insult can ruin their day. One rejection can destroy their confidence. One betrayal can make them distrust everyone forever. They wear their wounds on their faces, letting the world know exactly where they hurt. And because of that, they hand their power over to others. A cruel word from a stranger, a mocking laugh from a rival, a cold shoulder from a friend, these things control them like strings on a puppet. But the man on the train revealed something Napoleon Hill himself might have called a secret of the mind. The secret is this. Backhand index pointing right. The one who refuses to show pain becomes the master of every situation. This is not denial. It is not pretending you don't feel anything. It is mastery, the art of walking through storms without flinching, the art of enduring fire without letting the world see you burn. The paradox of indifference. When I later studied great leaders, inventors, and visionaries, I noticed they all carried this same quality. Abraham Lincoln faced endless criticism and betrayal, even from his own cabinet, but he rarely showed anger. Thomas Edison failed thousands of times in his experiments, yet he carried himself as though every failure was nothing more than data. And even in modern times, the strongest entrepreneurs, athletes, and thinkers are those who project unshakable calm in the face of defeat. This is the paradox of indifference. By appearing unhurt, you become stronger. By refusing to react, you gain control. By showing composure, you command respect without asking for it, and the world begins to whisper, "What does he know that we don't? How can she remain so calm when everyone else is falling apart?" The weight of reaction. Think about your own life for a moment. How many times have you let a single insult ruin your mood? How many days have been wasted replaying the sting of rejection? How many nights have you lost to the betrayal of someone you trusted? Every time you react in anger, frustration, or despair, you hand over the keys to your mind. You let the one who hurt you sit in the driver's seat of your own life. Napoleon Hill once wrote that the human mind is like a garden. If you don't plant useful seeds, weeds will grow by themselves. Anger, self-doubt, and fear are weeds. They grow quickly, and if you let them take root, they choke out the possibility of peace and power. But when you refuse to let pain govern you, you pull the weeds before they grow. You choose what gets planted in your mental soil. The armor of the mind. So how does one build this armor, this untouchable presence? It begins with a pause. When pain comes, and it always will, you don't immediately react. You take a breath. You step back. In that pause lies your choice. You can hand away your power and lash out, or you can remain calm and keep your crown. Each time you choose calm, your armor thickens. Each time you refuse to absorb the wound, your composure strengthens. Soon, you begin to see insults for what they really are, not reflections of you, but reflections of the one who throws them. Failures stop being labels and become lessons. Rejections stop being verdicts and become redirections. Betrayals stop being wounds and become revelations of truth. The man who could not be broken. Years later, I discovered the man on the train was no ordinary passenger. His name was Samuel Everett, a businessman who had once lost everything: his company, his fortune, even his closest friends. Betrayal and failure had nearly destroyed him. But instead of crumbling, he built the habit of indifference. He refused to let pain make him its puppet. He walked into meetings after devastating losses with the same composure he carried after victories. And because no one could ever see him broken, people assumed he was unbreakable. That reputation became his greatest power. He told me, "The world tests you every day. If you react to every sting, you lose. But if you carry yourself as if nothing hurts you, you win before the battle even begins." The invitation to power. This is the invitation I give to you now, to learn the art of acting as if nothing hurts you, not to deny pain, not to bury it, but to rise above it. Because the truth is simple: the one who cannot be rattled cannot be defeated. What comes next in part 2? I will share the step-by-step practices Samuel Everett taught me, methods for training your mind so that insults slide off. Failures sharpen you instead of breaking you, and betrayals leave you wiser, not weaker. Once you master these principles, you will no longer live as a puppet of circumstances. You will become the master of them. Sparkles. End of part 1. The Untouchable Mind. Part 2. The dinner conversation. A week after that train ride, Samuel Everett invited me to dinner. We met at a quiet restaurant on the Upper West Side, far from the noise of the city. He sat across from me, the same steady presence as before, unshaken, as though no problem in the world could touch him. "Young man," he said after the waiter left us, "you saw my calm that day on the train. What you didn't see were the years it took me to build it." He leaned closer. "I lost everything once. My company collapsed, partners betrayed me, and I became the laughingstock of the industry. I was angry, bitter, and broken. But then I discovered a truth: pain does not break you, your reaction does. That's when I began to train my mind." I asked him what he meant by training the mind, and what he shared next, I will never forget. Step 1: the pause. Most people, Samuel explained, react instantly to pain. An insult, a rejection, a failure, it hits them, and they lash out. But the first step to mastery is the pause. He tapped the table with his finger. Between the event and your reaction lies a space. Inside that space is your power. If you learn to pause, even for just a few seconds, you create distance between the sting and your spirit. He described how he practiced it. Whenever someone tried to provoke him, he would take a slow breath and silently count to 3. That simple pause prevented his emotions from taking control. "Think of it as catching the reins of a wild horse," he said. "If you grab the reins early, you guide the horse. If you let it run, you lose control." That night, I realized how often I had let my wild horse drag me wherever it pleased. Step 2: ask the higher question. Samuel smiled knowingly. Once you pause, the second step is to ask yourself a higher question. Does this truly matter to my purpose? He leaned back in his chair. An insult from a stranger, does that shape your destiny? A betrayal by a colleague, does it erase your potential? A rejection, does it define your worth? The answer is almost always no. When he first tried this, he admitted it felt strange. But with time, he discovered most of life's things were nothing more than distractions. They only mattered because he gave them energy. Every time you ask the higher question, he said, you take back the keys to your own mind. Step 3. Reframe the blow. Samuel then shared his third principle, reframing. Instead of letting failure bury you, he explained, see it as feedback. Instead of letting rejection poison you, see it as redirection. Instead of letting betrayal crush you, see it as clarity. You must turn every blow into a tool. He gave me an example from his own life. After losing his company, he could have called himself a failure. Instead, he reframed it, I did not fail. I discovered a strategy that does not work. That shift in perspective gave him the courage to try again. Napoleon Hill taught that every adversity carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. Samuel reminded me, the problem is, most men never look for the seed. They only stare at the ashes. Step 4. Guard the self-image. Then came perhaps the most powerful lesson of the evening. Son, he said, how you see yourself is everything. If you carry the image of being fragile, every insult will pierce you. But if you carry the image of being unshakable, no insult can enter. He told me he spent years imagining himself as iron, untouchable, calm, and sovereign. He visualized walking into rooms where critics whispered, yet he stood tall. He pictured setbacks bouncing off him like rain on steel. Do this long enough, he said, and the mind begins to believe it. You no longer pretend to be strong, you become strong. I thought of athletes who visualize victory before the game, soldiers who train in their minds before battle. Samuel was doing the same with his spirit. Step 5. Silence as power. Finally, Samuel spoke of silence. The world expects noise, he said. When someone insults you, they expect anger. When you fail, they expect excuses. When you're betrayed, they expect bitterness. But when you give them silence, you rob them of their weapon. He explained how silence is not weakness, it is strategy. It keeps your dignity intact, prevents others from reading your wounds, and creates an aura of mystery. People begin to wonder, why doesn't he flinch? Why doesn't she complain? And in that wonder lies authority. The lesson in action. As dinner ended, a small incident occurred that revealed the truth of Samuel's words. The waiter returned with our bill but mistakenly charged us for another table's expensive meal. I was ready to protest, to raise my voice at the error. But Samuel calmly smiled at the waiter and said, I believe there's a small mistake here, friend. Would you kindly check it again? The waiter turned red, apologized, and corrected a dot on the walk outside. Samuel looked at me and said, see, power is not in raising your voice. Power is in keeping your presence. A calm man always wins. The practice for the reader. That night, I wrote down the 5 steps Samuel taught me. 1. The pause, catch your reaction before it catches you. Point 2. The higher question, ask, does this truly matter to my purpose? 3. Reframe the blow, turn failures into lessons, rejections into redirections, betrayals into clarity. Point 4. Guard the self-image, see yourself as unshakable until the mind believes it. Point 5. Silence as power, starve your enemies of reaction, feed your spirit with composure. These became my daily practice. And as I lived them, something remarkable happened. People began to treat me differently. They spoke to me with more respect. Rivals lost interest in trying to provoke me. Friends trusted me with their struggles because they knew I would not be shaken. It was as if the world had shifted, but the truth was simpler. I had shifted. What comes next? Samuel promised me that if I mastered these 5 steps, I would no longer be ruled by circumstances. But he also warned, mastery of the mind is tested in fire. Life will send storms to see if your armor holds. The true measure of strength comes not in peace, but in chaos. In part 3, I will share the story of the great trial that tested Samuel's philosophy, the betrayal that could have destroyed him, and how he used it to rise instead. It is in that trial that the final secret of becoming untouchable was revealed. Sparkle's end of part 2. The Untouchable Mind, part 3. The fall of a titan. Samuel Everett had not always been the calm, unshakable man I knew. In his earlier years, he was fiery, ambitious, and quick to react. By the time he was 35, he had built one of the most promising import businesses on the East Coast. His name carried weight. Investors trusted him, employees admired him, and competitors feared him. But just when his success seemed unstoppable, betrayal struck. Point 2 of his closest partners, men he had treated like brothers, secretly conspired to take the company for themselves. They forged documents, spread false rumors, and turned loyal clients against him. In a matter of months, Samuel lost control of the company he had built from scratch. His fortune evaporated, and his reputation was dragged through mud. Imagine, he told me one night as we walked along Riverside Drive, building a house brick by brick for 10 years, only to wake up and see it burn to ashes, not by strangers, but by the very men you fed at your table. I could hear the weight in his voice. Most men would have crumbled under such a betrayal. Many would have drowned in bitterness, anger, and endless revenge. But Samuel chose another path. The storm inside, he admitted the nights were hardest. He would lie awake, his mind replaying every detail, every handshake, every laugh, every moment he thought those men were loyal. The betrayal cut deep. Pain, he said, always comes first as a roar in the chest. Your pride feels crushed, your trust shattered. That is natural. But suffering, that comes from feeding the roar with your attention. He remembered pacing his small apartment, broken, when he suddenly recalled Napoleon Hill's principle. Every adversity carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. At first, those words felt like mockery. What seed could there possibly be in the ashes of betrayal? But Samuel forced himself to pause, breathe, and search for it. And slowly he found it. The hidden gift of betrayal. The gift of betrayal, Samuel said, is clarity. You finally see who is truly for you, and who is against you. Betrayal wipes the fog from your eyes. He realized that those partners had always been envious, always cutting small corners, always whispering about shortcuts. He had ignored the signs because of friendship. The betrayal simply revealed the truth he had refused to see. Once I accepted that, he told me, the anger began to dissolve. They had freed me. Freed me from liars, freed me from false alliances. I did not lose brothers. I lost enemies who had disguised themselves as friends. Turning pain into power. But Samuel's greatest shift came when he applied the 5 principles he had shared with me. The pause, when he wanted to write angry letters, confront them in court with fury, or spread rumors in return, he stopped himself. He paused. He remembered, reaction is surrender. The higher question, he asked himself, does their betrayal end my destiny? The answer was no. His life's purpose was not tied to their schemes. Reframed the blow, he began to see the collapse not as an ending, but as data. Their betrayal revealed the weaknesses in his business model. It taught him where trust must be guarded, where systems needed to be stronger. Guard the self-image. Instead of seeing himself as a ruined man, he pictured himself rising, stronger, wiser, untouchable. Every morning, he visualized walking with dignity, no matter how poor his pockets were. Silence as power. Perhaps most remarkable of all, Samuel never retaliated publicly. He never cursed his former partners. He never spread stories. He allowed silence to do the talking. And as time passed, their own dishonor caught up with them. The years in the wilderness Samuel did not bounce back overnight. For 2 years, he worked quietly, rebuilding his fortune from scratch. He studied new markets, made fresh connections, and developed businesses in industries he had never touched before. During those years, he lived simply, no expensive suits, no lavish offices. But he carried himself with the same calm dignity. To anyone who met him, he looked unbothered, untouched, unbreakable. "People assume you are who you appear to be," he explained. "If you act like a man defeated, the world will believe it and treat you as such. If you act like a man still in command, the world will eventually bend to that image." The return of power then, almost as if by design, Samuel rose again. A new business venture in logistics grew beyond his expectations. Investors who had once abandoned him returned, drawn by his reputation for calm leadership. Employees flocked to him, inspired by his steadiness in the storm. And the best part? His betrayers, the partners who had tried to ruin him, eventually destroyed themselves. Their greed turned them against each other, and the company they had stolen collapsed within 3 years. Samuel never raised a hand against them. He never uttered their names in bitterness. Life itself handed him justice, while he kept his energy focused on building, not breaking. The aura of mystery. As he told me this story, I finally understood what made Samuel so magnetic. When a man loses everything and yet carries himself with composure, he radiates an aura of strength few can match. People cannot understand it, so they whisper, "How can he walk with such calm when others would have fallen apart?" That mystery becomes authority. That calm becomes respect. That silence becomes power. Samuel looked me in the eye and said, "The one who cannot be rattled cannot be defeated." Betrayal was my greatest gift, because it taught me that truth. The Napoleon Hill principle alive. What Samuel embodied was exactly what Napoleon Hill wrote decades ago. Every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. The betrayal that could have destroyed him instead became the soil for his greatest growth. And because he chose indifference, calm, and mastery, he did not just survive it, he transcended it. The lesson for us. Samuel ended his story with advice for me, and for anyone willing to listen. 1. Do not fear betrayal. It only reveals the truth. 2. Do not feed anger. It consumes you, not your enemy. 3. Do not waste words. Silence is the sharpest blade. 4. Do not see failure as an identity. It is a classroom, nothing more. 5. Do not let wounds define you. Carry yourself as though pain never touched you, and the world will treat you as untouchable. What comes next? As we left that evening, Samuel paused at the corner, the city lights reflecting off the wet streets. "Life," he said, "is not finished testing you. There will always be another storm, another insult, another betrayal. But once you master your mind, nothing outside you can ever defeat you." In part 4, I will share how Samuel taught me to train resilience daily, not in moments of crisis, but in the quiet hours, when no one is watching. For it is in small habits that great strength is forged. Sparkles. End of part 3. Do you want me to continue with part 4, 1000 words, where Samuel shows the narrator how to practice resilience in daily life, building habits, routines, and a mindset that prepares you for storms before they arrive? The Untouchable Mind, Part 4. The morning walk. A week after Samuel shared his story of betrayal, he invited me to join him for a morning walk in Central Park. It was early, the city still yawning awake, the air crisp and cool. As we walked under the trees, Samuel turned to me and said, "You don't wait for storms to practice resilience. If you do, you'll be swept away. Strength is not built in crisis. It's built in the quiet hours, when no one is watching." That morning, he began teaching me how to train the mind daily, just as one trains the body. Lesson 1. The discipline of the morning. Your mornings, Samuel said, set the tone for your entire day. Most people roll out of bed and surrender instantly to chaos, checking their phones, worrying about yesterday's problems, rushing into the noise of the world. But the man who commands his morning commands his life. He told me that each morning, before speaking to anyone, he spent 10 minutes in stillness. No phone. No conversation. Just breathing, reflecting, and choosing his state of mind for the day. In those 10 minutes, he explained, I remind myself of who I am, calm, steady, unshakable. By the time I face the world, my armor is already on. I realized then what Napoleon Hill often wrote, that success is not an accident of chance, but a habit of discipline. Samuel's morning discipline was his shield. Lesson 2. Practicing the pause. As we reached the park's fountain, Samuel stopped and smiled. Do you remember the first step I taught you? The pause? You must practice it every day, not only when storms hit, but in small moments. He gave me an example. Each time he stood in line at a grocery store and felt impatience rising, he practiced pausing. Each time a driver cut him off in traffic, he practiced pausing. Each time someone said something careless, he practiced pausing. Most men waste their patience on small irritations, so when big trials come, they have no patience left. But if you train on the little things, you'll be ready when the big ones strike. I laughed and said, so even standing in line is training? Of course, he said. The man who cannot control himself in line will never control himself in life. Lesson 3. Feeding the mind. We stopped to rest on a bench. Samuel pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket. Inside were quotes, principles, and affirmations he had written over the years. Most people feed their bodies 3 times a day but starve their minds, he said. And then they wonder why they feel weak when trials come. Every day, Samuel read or wrote something that reminded him of strength, purpose, and indifference to pain. He studied philosophy, biographies of great leaders, and of course, Napoleon Hill's writings. Your mind becomes what you feed it, he explained. If you feed it anger, it will grow anger. If you feed it calm, it will grow calm. Choose your diet wisely. That day, I decided to begin keeping my own notebook of strength. Lesson 4. Small acts of indifference. Samuel's next practice surprised me. Every day, he said, I deliberately expose myself to small discomforts and refuse to react. It may be walking in the rain without an umbrella, or skipping sugar in my coffee, or staying silent when I want to speak. These little tests remind me that discomfort does not control me. He called them rehearsals of resilience. If you cannot endure a skipped coffee, how will you endure betrayal? If you cannot endure a little rain, how will you endure loss? This was classic Napoleon Hill, training the will in small matters so it can command in great ones. Lesson 5. The evening review. As we headed back toward the city streets, Samuel shared his final practice of the day. The evening review. Before bed, he said, I asked myself 3 questions. 1. Where did I let pain affect me today? 2. Where did I remain calm? 3. How will I improve tomorrow? He told me he never judged himself harshly in these reviews. The point was not to punish himself, but to learn. Over time, these nightly reflections became a mirror, showing him where his armor was strong and where it still had cracks. Awareness, he said, is the beginning of mastery. You cannot fix what you do not see. The test in the park. As if life wanted to test Samuel's words, a moment happened right then in the park. A jogger, not paying attention, bumped into us, nearly knocking me off balance. I turned ready to shout, but Samuel placed a hand on my shoulder. The jogger muttered a half-hearted apology and ran on. Notice, Samuel said, how quickly your pride wanted to react. But ask yourself, does a careless jogger matter to your destiny? Will his rudeness define your future? Of course not. That moment was training, nothing more. I laughed, embarrassed, but also enlightened. The world itself was a classroom. Every irritation was a chance to practice strength. The formula of daily strength. By the time we left the park, Samuel had given me a simple formula to follow. Morning stillness. Begin the day with silence and self-command. Practice the pause. Train patience on small irritations. Feed the mind. Nourish yourself daily with strong thoughts. Acts of indifference. Expose yourself to small discomforts without reacting. Evening review. Reflect, learn, and adjust before sleep. He looked at me and said, "These habits may seem small, but stacked together, they build a fortress around your mind. And when storms come, that fortress will not fall." The Napoleon Hill connection. As I walked home later, I thought about how closely Samuel's daily practices echoed Napoleon Hill's philosophy. Hill often said that success is the sum of small efforts, repeated day in and day out. Samuel had turned that principle toward resilience. He had proven that mental mastery is not built in moments of glory, but in daily choices. Morning silence, patient pauses, disciplined thoughts, small acts of discomfort, and nightly reflection. These were not heroic acts, but simple ones. Yet together they made him unshakable. "What comes next?" Before we parted that day, Samuel warned me. "Do not think these habits will stop life from striking you. The storms will still come. Pain will still arrive. But if you practice daily, when the storm comes, you will not be shaken. You will walk through it as though it were only wind." In part 5, I will share the story of my own test, the moment when life struck me hard, and I had to apply Samuel's lessons myself. For until knowledge is tested in fire, it remains only theory. Sparkles. End of part 4. Would you like me to continue with part 5, 1000 words, where the narrator himself faces a personal crisis and has to use Samuel's teachings for the first time? The Untouchable Mind, Part 5. The unexpected blow. For months after my walks with Samuel Everett, I practiced his methods faithfully. Each morning I sat in silence. Each day I rehearsed a pause. Each night I reviewed my behavior. Slowly, I began to feel changes in myself. I was calmer in conversations, less shaken by small irritations, and more focused on my work. But I had not yet been truly tested. That test came on a day I least expected. At the time, I was working for a small publishing company in Manhattan. I had poured myself into my projects, staying late nights, bringing ideas to life, believing I was on the path to a promotion. My supervisor often praised my dedication, and I felt secure. Then one morning, without warning, I was called into the office of the managing director. Sitting beside him was the very supervisor I trusted. And on the table lay a stack of reports, my reports, marked with red ink. The director spoke coldly. "It seems your numbers are off. We've received complaints. This work is sloppy. I'm afraid your time here is over." I was stunned. Before I could speak, my supervisor leaned forward and added, "I warned him about his lack of detail. He didn't listen." His words pierced me. Not only was I being fired, but the man I thought was my supporter had betrayed me. My chest burned. I wanted to defend myself, to shout, to call him a liar. But then I remembered Samuel's teachings. The pause and practice. The first instinct was rage. My hands clenched under the table, my tongue ready to unleash. But Samuel's voice echoed in my mind. "Between the event and your reaction lies a space. Inside that space is your power." I took a deep breath. 1, 2, 3. The pause. By the time I opened my mouth, the fire in me had softened. Instead of shouting, I simply said, "Thank you for the opportunity. I understand." The director looked at me strangely, perhaps expecting an argument. My supervisor shifted uncomfortably. I stood, shook their hands, and walked out. On the elevator ride down, my heart pounded. My pride screamed. But my mind whispered, "You just practiced the first step." The higher question as I walked out onto the street, the sting grew heavier. Thoughts flooded in. How could he betray me? How will I pay my bills? What will people think? But then Samuel's second principle rose in my memory. Ask the higher question, does this truly matter to my purpose? Did this job define my destiny? Did one man's betrayal erase my future? Did this setback mean I was finished? The answer was clear. No. It hurt, yes. But it did not change who I was or what I could become. That realization loosened the weight on my shoulders. Reframing the blow still, I couldn't shake the sense of injustice. Why had this happened? Why had my work been twisted against me? Then I remembered the third principle. Reframe the blow. What if this firing was not a punishment, but a redirection? What if the betrayal was not an end, but a sign? I asked myself, had I really loved that job? The truth was no. I had always dreamed of writing my own work, not simply editing someone else's. Perhaps this door closed so another could open. I reframed the firing, not as rejection, but as release. Not as failure, but as freedom. Guarding my self-image that night, alone in my small apartment, doubt crept in. The words of my supervisor echoed. Sloppy. Not detail-oriented. Didn't listen. For a moment, I felt myself shrinking. But then Samuel's fourth principle rose like a shield. Guard the self-image. I closed my eyes and imagined myself as Samuel had taught. Calm, steady, untouchable. I pictured myself walking with dignity, even in defeat. I repeated to myself, this does not define me. I am more than this moment. And as I reinforced that image, I began to believe it. The silence of power. The next day, a colleague called me, eager for gossip. I heard what happened, she whispered. Everyone's saying your boss set you up. What are you going to do? Will you tell people the truth? The temptation was strong. I wanted to expose him, to explain, to gather sympathy. But then Samuel's final principle returned. Silence is power. So I simply replied, it's in the past. I'm moving on. She was quiet for a moment, almost disappointed. Then she said softly, I respect that. I realized then that silence protects dignity. It makes others wonder. And wonder creates respect. The seed in adversity. Weeks passed. At first, I struggled with doubt, but each day I practiced the habits Samuel taught me. Morning stillness, small acts of indifference, evening review. Slowly, new ideas began to grow in my mind. I started writing essays, short stories, and reflections, pieces of my own, not for a company, but for myself. A few I shared online. To my surprise, people responded. My words carried weight. It was then I saw the seed inside the adversity. Had I not been fired, I might still be trapped in that office, editing work I did not care for. The betrayal had pushed me toward my true calling. Just as Napoleon Hill promised, every adversity carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. The return to Samuel. One evening, I visited Samuel again. We sat in his study, the fire casting shadows on the walls. I told him the whole story, how I was fired, how I was betrayed, how I applied his lessons. He listened quietly, nodding. When I finished, he smiled. Young man, he said, now you understand. Knowledge without trial is theory. But once tested, it becomes wisdom. You have walked through the fire and come out stronger. I asked him if he had expected me to face a storm so soon. He chuckled. Life does not wait. The moment you begin building your armor, it tests the steel. That is the way of things. The shift in identity from that point on, something changed in me. I no longer saw myself as fragile, easily wounded. I no longer feared rejection or betrayal, for I had tasted them, survived them, and transformed them into strength. People around me began to notice. Friends remarked on my calmness. Strangers treated me with unexpected respect. It was not that I sought these things, it was that my presence had shifted. Samuel once told me, "When you carry yourself as if nothing can hurt you, the world will believe it. And in time, so will you." Now I understood what comes next, but Samuel was not finished teaching me. One evening, he leaned across the table and said, "You have learned to endure storms. Now it is time to learn how to lead others through them. For the highest power is not only to master yourself, but to inspire strength in others." In part 6, the final chapter, I will share how Samuel revealed the last secret, the art of leadership through calm presence, and how the untouchable mind not only protects itself, but changes everyone it encounters. Sparkles. End of part 5. Would you like me to send part 6, the final 1000 words, where Samuel passes on his last and greatest lesson about how calm presence turns into leadership and influence? The Untouchable Mind, part 6, final chapter. The quiet leader. The weeks after my dismissal became the richest season of my life. My mind, once restless, now carried an anchor of calm. Yet Samuel reminded me, self-mastery is only the first half of the journey. The greater half is service. What you conquer in yourself must flow outward to others, or else it withers. I leaned forward in his study that night, hungry for the final revelation. "But how," I asked, "does one lead others with calmness? Isn't leadership about authority, decisions, commands?" He smiled knowingly. "That is the world's mistake. True leadership begins not with the voice, but with the presence. Authority shouted from the throat is brittle. Authority lived in silence is unbreakable." His words puzzled me then, but their meaning soon revealed itself in the fire of life. The meeting of chaos. 1 month later, I was invited by a small circle of writers to join their discussions. The group was talented, but pride ran high, and disagreements often flared into heated arguments. At my very first meeting, 2 men nearly came to blows over a petty debate about style. Their voices shook the room, and others fidgeted, afraid to speak. My old self would have panicked, shrinking back or trying desperately to calm them with frantic words. But this time, I remembered Samuel's law of presence. So I said nothing. I sat still. My face remained serene. My breathing was steady. While others fidgeted, I became the unmoved center. Slowly, one man noticed. His voice faltered. The other glanced at me, puzzled. A silence spread. Then, without a single word from me, the storm broke. The group resumed discussion, calmer now. Several eyes returned to me, as though I had performed a miracle. But I had only done what Samuel taught, carry myself as unshakable, and others will borrow my calm. That was the night I tasted the secret of invisible leadership. The principle of presence. When I told Samuel what happened, he nodded as though expecting it. "You see," he said, "most men are ruled by reaction. When another grows loud, they grow louder. When another grows angry, they grow defensive. It is a chain of fire. But if one soul in the room refuses to burn, the fire has nowhere to spread. Calmness is contagious. It spreads faster than panic if one dares to hold it." I asked him if this was how great leaders commanded their people without raising their voices. He replied, "Precisely. A leader is not the loudest man in the room. He is the steadiest. Men follow not noise, but certainty. And certainty radiates in silence more powerfully than in speech. The invisible magnet. As the weeks turned into months, I began to notice a change in my life. People sought me out for advice. Friends confided in me. Even strangers seemed to trust me at once. It was not because I had suddenly grown wiser, but because my presence carried assurance. Where others carried agitation, I carried peace. Where others panicked, I stood still. Samuel explained, "Calmness is a magnet. It draws the weary, the doubtful, the fearful. They do not even know why they are drawn. They only sense that near you, they feel stronger." And I realized this was the true reward of indifference, not merely freedom from pain, but power to guide others through their storms. The legacy of Samuel Everett. One evening, as autumn leaves fell outside, Samuel called me to his study for the last time. His frame was thinner now, his movements slower. Yet his eyes burned brighter than ever. "My young friend," he said softly, "I have given you all I know. The principles of pause, higher question, reframing, self-image, silence, you have lived them. But now you must carry them into the world. For what good is an untouchable mind if it touches no one?" I asked him what I should do. "Lead," he replied. "Not with noise, not with force, but with example. In every room you enter, in every storm you face, be the anchor. Men will follow not your speeches, but your steadiness. That is the final mastery, not to rule yourself alone, but to inspire strength in others." I sat in silence, humbled. Samuel closed his eyes for a moment, then said, "Remember, adversity is the furnace, calmness is the steel, and service is the sword. Wield it well." Those were the last words of teaching I received from him. Days later, Samuel Everett passed from this world quietly, leaving behind no riches, no monument, only the treasure of an untouchable mind, passed into mine. The untouchable legacy. Years have passed since then. I have faced more trials, losses, betrayals, uncertainties. But each time, I remembered Samuel's wisdom. And each time, I stood still, calm, unshaken. In time, I became a leader in my own right. Not the kind who demands obedience, but the kind who inspires trust. And I discovered that Samuel was right. Men do not follow words, they follow presence. Today, I tell you this story not for my sake, nor even for Samuel's, but for yours. For the untouchable mind is not reserved for a chosen few. It is within you, waiting to be forged in silence, in trial, in resilience. If you would master life, master first your response. If you would lead others, stand steady yourself. If you would change the world, begin by becoming unshakable. This was Samuel's gift to me. And now, it is mine to give to you. Call to action, my friend. If this story touched you, do not keep it hidden. Share it with those who need strength. Discuss it with those who battle storms. Let Samuel Everett's legacy live not only in me, but in you, and in all who dare to walk with calm through the fire. Backhand index pointing right. So I ask you, if this story inspired you, subscribe for more. If it strengthened you, share it with others who need courage. And if it stirred something in your heart, leave a comment with your thoughts. For the untouchable mind is not a tale, it is a movement. And together, we can build a world of leaders who cannot be broken. Sparkles. And a final part. The untouchable mind sparkles.